Hey there, it's Dr. B, and Pink's taking a nap in the back. I'm doing a special live that I wanted to share with you a little bit about the development of your executive function your executive function skills. It's a little bit later in the day than I typically go live, so I don't know if anybody's going to be here live. But the video, oh, I see someone is. The video will be here for a replay, so that'll work out fine. So the one thing I wanted to say first is I'm the one that checks when everyone asks to come into the group. So I get to read what each person writes about why they're asking to join the group. And every single person here, almost without exception, is interested in the development of their executive function skills. And so that being the case, it's really important to me to help you to understand a little bit more about the development of your executive function skills. And so that's why I decided to pop in today and talk about that. I'm not sure who's here live. If you put your name in the comment section underneath this video post, I'll be able to know who's there. Otherwise, eCam doesn't show me. Oh, a couple of people. All right. If you put your names, I'll be able to know who's there and certainly answer any questions that you have. So let's talk about the development of executive function skills. Because when I mentioned that, hi Arda, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, I hope. Thank you. When I talk about executive function skills, I'm talking about things like your ability to plan, your ability to organize not only what's in here, your thinking, which is hard to organize when it just stays inside because you can't see it, to organize your environment, to be able to remember things, which is your working memory, and work with information when there's more than just one thing at a time, and be able to integrate that information, to be able to do things like get started when it's time to get started. And some of you I know are great at planning, and you make a beautiful plan, and you may even schedule it. But the problem ends up when it's time to actually implement the plan that you beautifully creative. It's in that moment of action. Doesn't happen. You don't get started. And whether it's because you don't feel like it in the moment, but you felt like it when you planned it and you scheduled it, that's a huge problem for us, because out of the moment when it needs to happen, which is why so many people do things at the last minute when they are in the mood. Hey there. Thank you, Laura. It's good to see you. And that's why so many people at the last minute will do things, because you're in the mood. It's like, I'm excited about this, so I'm going to go do this, and maybe even to the exclusion of the things that are supposed to be happening in that moment because you're excited about something else, and that's what gets done, and the other thing that was scheduled or planned doesn't. That's a problem, because we need to be able to feel like doing the things we were excited to plan, to schedule, to do when they're to happen, and not leaving it to chance that I scheduled it, I planned it, but I don't know what I'm going to do if I don't wake up tomorrow morning or the next day and I don't feel like doing it. What do I do other than just bail and it doesn't get done? Which is a horrible way to live from my perspective, because who controls how they wake up from day to day? And we need tools to be able to shift our state, shift our moods, be able to shift into the state, the place that we need to be, that we may have been when we originally scheduled and planned it, so that it can actually happen. And these are executive function skills. Other things like, I don't know how many of you are successful in your relationship life. And this could be relationships with people at work. This could be at home. This could be intimate, romantic, friends. It could be any kind of relationships. There is an executive function skill that has to do with self-monitoring, which is a relational skill. If we don't have the ability to see ourselves and see how we are relating with others, it's very difficult to have successful and rewarding relationships with other people, including yourself. It's difficult if you can't see you and how you're relating to you. Other things that are executive function skills that I focus on. I know that I look at these as executive function skills, but more pre-skills, you could say. Pre-skills like, I don't know how many of you are challenged with making decisions. I know the way that I was raised to make decisions, and maybe you got the same training. You know, my dad taught me about decision making, and it was the good old Ben Franklin way, which was take a piece of paper, divide it in half, sometimes fold it or draw a line, and then put pros on one side and cons on the other, look at both, and make a decision. Seriously? There isn't enough information to make a decision from that amount of information, pros and cons. But that's what he gave me. That was my training for decision making. So it does not surprise me that I made decisions that didn't turn out well because I didn't have any pre-skill. I call these pre-skill training as to what it really takes, what kind of criteria, your values, so many other things that you need, that information and a methodology to be able to know that the decisions you're making are actually good decisions before you implement on the decision. And I know today the decisions that I make, for the most part, are good decisions before I ever implement on the decision. It's a huge difference from what it was. Another thing I look at as a pre-skill that you might see as a skill that maybe you have or you don't have, other than decision making, is you might have difficulty with managing time, yourself in time, and time itself. Now, mind you, are we really managing time? Because time, we get 24 hours, it's an agreed upon thing, 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week, various different days in a month, and so on and so on. But if you look at that and say, do you really get a 24-hour day? No, I don't. I sleep 8 hours, so I focus with a 16-hour day. But even with 16 hours, I have to be able to manage me in those 16 hours so that 16 hours doesn't come and go every single day. And the things that are important to happen don't. And so time management is an important pre-skill. And the same thing with procrastination. Hey, Dawn, the same thing with procrastination. You know, I like to banish procrastination and just kick it to the curb, get rid of it, not be under the influence of procrastination, because procrastination means things aren't going to happen. And a lot of people think procrastination is the problem. I've learned over the years it's not the problem, but it's definitely a symptom of the problem. And there's many underlying factors of why people procrastinate, whether it's at the beginning of doing something, the middle, the end, all of it. People procrastinate and things don't happen. So those three things as pre-skills executive function pre-skills, I find, builds a really strong foundation to the other 13 that I teach. So let me go back to the beginning in terms of how do these things develop. Ideally, when we're kids, these skills develop as we develop during our childhood. And I know for myself, being older, I'm 70, a lot of the games that were childhood games when I was growing up actually taught some of the executive function skills. For example, one of the skills of inhibit. Inhibit is about pausing, stopping. Shifting is about making transitions. And I remember different games, whether it's Simon Says, whether it was musical chairs, whether it was all these different games that I played as a kid. There were all of these executive function skills that were wrapped up in these games. The problem is there wasn't a concentration, and there was certainly a lot of judgment. At least I experienced that if you didn't do it right, if somebody thought that you moved and you didn't move, or you this or you that, and then you got criticized, it wasn't a judgment-free space. And one of the things that allows these skills to develop, especially in adulthood, is a judgment-free space. We need to be able to learn them, practice them, experiment, play, learn them, get them in our bones, get a sense and a feeling of what these skills are. And we need to be able to do that in a judgment-free place where we're just going to be supported and we can ask as many questions as we need to ask. And I'm sure that one of the reasons that I had difficulty with all of this is I always have so many questions about so many things, and the people, whether they were my teachers, my parents, friends, whoever, just got tired of my curiosity, which never seems to end, and all the questions that I had. And that hasn't stopped as an adult, but I can look it up on the internet. I have other people I can ask. I can ask myself. I can find answers that weren't available, technologically speaking, when I was a kid. It's much easier to address my curiosity and my never-ending, it seems, desire to know things. And that part's great. But going back to how do these develop? So let's say part of your childhood, like many of us, many of the things that you all have shared. Hey, Hannah, good to see you. Many of the things that you all have shared with me, whether here in the group or other places, we fit, I'm not going to say that we fit like in a cookie cutter kind of thing, but we fit in a group of kinds of things, experiences that we as adult people experienced growing up as children, teens, young adults, adults, and even older adults like me. And that is everything from depression, anxiety, illnesses, traumas, addictions, ADHD if it wasn't known about, learning differences, the list just goes on. And the reason that I bring that up is because who have become my students over the years and learned from me aren't exclusively adults with ADHD, but everyone whose executive function skills ended up underdeveloped because of one of those conditions. Because if you're chronically depressed when you're growing up, if you're in an environment that's depressing growing up, if you're in an environment that causes you to be anxious, agitated, if it's traumatic, if there were addictions or you ended up with addictions yourself, all of these things derail the development of our executive function skills. How do they do that? Well, The energy, if you think about it this way, this is how I think about it. The energy that's supposed to go into the development of the skills, which means I'm focused and I'm present and I'm thinking about what's going on and I'm thinking about musical chairs and I'm thinking about whatever it is that I might be engaged in play as a kid or even as a teen. I'm there and I'm present as much as possible. However, if you're not present because of other conditions and the energy that's supposed to be going into the development of these skills, these executive function skills, is being siphoned off, you could say, to other situations, to deal with a depression, to deal with anxiety, to deal with trauma, to deal with addictions, to deal with chronic illness, to deal with ADHD, anything, these chronic situations, conditions. I don't like diagnostic labels, so I stay away from them as much as possible. But in a general sense, using these words, hopefully you understand so many of us, with or without an ADHD diagnosis or brain, can end up with underdeveloped executive function skills. And what's even more fascinating, but also sad, is that there's a diagnostic manual. It's called the DSM-5, the most current version, which is 2013. There isn't a diagnosis in that book for underdeveloped executive function skills. So how would you know that your skills are underdeveloped? Unless you've been listening to my podcast for a while, unless you've been in the group for a while and look at the posts and listen to some of the lives that I do and some of the questions that I answer from people. Because if you went and got a diagnosis, let's say for depression or anxiety, and that's often given in place of an ADHD diagnosis because professionals aren't required to know anything academically about us in their training. I've looked. I continue to look. Hasn't changed yet. What has changed is we get a little bit of a continuing education unit about ADHD in adults. It's really superficial. I just did it for the renewal of my therapist license recently. And I had to answer questions incorrectly to get them right, to get credit. It was really bad. That's what's being offered. So you probably know more about yourself than some people do about you that you work with, that you see. And if you get frustrated because they don't seem to understand or they can't seem to help, it's simply because they're not being equipped to help. And it's really a huge problem. And so if you get a diagnosis of ADHD from someone, and even if you decide to take medication, as you've heard me say many times, because I'm not anti-medication, there's no skills in the pills that we take if we're taking medication. So those skills don't come back online. You know, I used to wonder about that years and years ago before I started teaching the development of the skills. And I wondered, after the trauma is over, after the depression is over, after the crisis is over, and all my energy is no longer diverted into whatever that situation is that diverted my energy so that these skills weren't developing correctly, don't these skills just keep developing now that that's over? No, they don't. And that was startling to me because I thought, okay, I'm in the clear. They'll just pick up again and start to develop. We have to reboot them. We have to, we'll say, formally train and learn those skills that would have developed, we'll say, mostly naturally in childhood, depending on the kind of childhood that we had. But they don't continue to develop once they've derailed. And so think about it. If things in your life, for example, derail the development of your skills, and you were 5, or you were 7, or you were 10, or whatever age you were, and you're struggling with the things that I talked about at the very beginning of this live, and you're having difficulty organizing your thinking and planning and scheduling and following through and keeping your word and starting things and finishing things all the way to completion. And you can't pause because things just blip come out of your mouth, like you think it, you say it, or you think it or you feel it and you do it. And there's no pause button that's been installed there because the inhibiting executive function skill isn't fully developed. So of course you're not inhibiting. And years ago, when I used to do presentations at various conferences, I presented about this and talked about this with an eating disorders organization. And I asked them whether or not at that time they were doing assessments for ADHD and looking at people's executive function, because the diagnosis of ADHD is the only diagnosis where the list of these executive functions exists. You will not find it in the diagnosis for depression. You will not find the list of executive function skills in a diagnosis for anxiety. You won't find it in trauma. You won't find it in addictions. You won't find it in chronic illnesses. And so let's say that you or someone you know goes to have a diagnosis and an assessment, and they say, no, you do not have ADHD. Okay. But you are struggling with all the things that I'm talking about. You don't have to have ADHD to have underdeveloped executive function skills. The articles and research that I've done basically says if we have ADHD, the odds are very, very high, whether it's 90+%, that we're going to have underdeveloped executive function skills. And that we don't need an ADHD diagnosis to also have a very high rate of underdeveloped skills. And they, in the article that I read, when I read it a few years back, they didn't talk about all the other conditions that I talk about, because I've been studying this and looking at people and looking at their skills and assessing people other than people with ADHD and seeing their skills aren't well developed either, which is how I came to this conclusion that the focus really, really needs to be on our executive function skill development. And yes, I can focus and do focus on helping people with being inattentive and being hyperactive and being impulsive. But I also focus on like the hyperactivity here, cognitive hyperactivity. Because for those of you, the 6 of you that are here live, it's like when we get to be an adult, the physical hyperactivity of moving around and being so hyperactive and needing to climb trees, walls, buildings, leap, all the things I did as a kid because I was very, very physically active, overly so, and I constantly needed to move. But even as an adult, I still need to move. That's why I have a chair that moves, and it also rocks so that I get some movement. That helps that part. But here in my mind, it isn't quiet. Sometimes it's like a freeway at rush hour. There's so many thoughts and so many ideas, and you may have the same thing going on. They call this cognitive hyperactivity, not just hyperactivity thinking physically. And so most of the adults that I know that get a diagnosis usually get diagnosed with ADHD inattentive. And yet when I talk to them, they're cognitively hyperactive, which means they'd be ADHD combined and not just inattentive. But as long as there's so much ignorance and misunderstanding about who we really are and what's really going on, this is unfortunately going to continue. And so the way that I look at ADHD is if inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity, those three core symptoms of ADHD, are not responsible for why you can't organize your thoughts, why you can't organize your environment, why you can't get started, why you can't keep your word, why you can't follow through, why you can't pause, why you can't see the bigger picture, before you go over the cliff, no foresight, all these different things. Unless those three core symptoms are responsible for the things I just said and more, then it isn't coming from those three core symptoms of ADHD. It's coming from underdeveloped skills. And again, we don't see these underdeveloped skills listed in all the other diagnoses or conditions that I talked about. So people are walking around. Most of you that have come into the group, I think our group is almost 2,400 adults at this point, give or take, at last checking. And just about every single person who writes and asks to join says the same kind of thing. They're struggling with their executive function skills. They can't plan, they can't organize, they can't follow through, they're getting behind at work, this, that, and for the women here in the group, if no one has told you about the great equalizer going through either perimenopause, menopause, even if it's induced menopause, basically meaning that your estrogen levels start to drop. Estrogen levels are connected to cognitive function. And I know when that happened to me in my early 50s and no one had told me, to know that this was coming. And it was shocking to wake up and feel like I woke up with an alien brain that did not work, did not function, and didn't have the strategies and skills that it used to. And it's like I needed to rebuild everything. And that's what I ended up doing. Only this time, because I'd done all the studying, I understood the skills. They weren't just haphazardly built the way they were built the first time. They got built really strong with a strong foundation, every one of them. And they continue to get stronger every day because now they're a part of me and they're a part of how I live. And so, I don't know if any of you four right now who are here live have any questions. This group, we have educational posts. I occasionally go live. We have an amazing community of people that engage in posts that we post so that you can learn, you can read articles, you can contribute, you can support each other. And I absolutely adore this community for that. The thing that this community isn't per se, because it was never designed to be that, it's not a training group. And because it isn't a training group, because it wasn't designed to be that, even though we offer a lot of training and a lot of insight and information and how to go about doing certain things from the posts about all the various executive function skills that you'll find here in the group. Instead, since this is not a training group, there is a training group. And the training group is Adventures in Achievement Foundational Skills Program, which is we'll call it signature program. It's my baby. And it's a 7-month program. And if you're one of the people who came into this group asking for help with your executive function skills, then honestly, there is nothing better. There's nothing like it in the world, first of all, other than what I created, because one, I created something that's everything that I needed, everything that I know that the people I knew up to the point that I created it needed. And then I added a few other things as I became aware of what was needed. And now it contains everything that's needed. And to me, it's amazing, because me at 70, when I was rebuilding my skills, was in my 50s. It's like 20 years ago, give or take. And the rest of the time I had okay, not so okay, ups, downs, all of that. It was a struggle. Everything was harder. Everything took longer. I worked really, really hard to achieve everything I achieved in my life. And I realized since I've been teaching these skills now and developing them myself, been teaching them for roughly 5 years online. And in doing that, I realized how much easier my life would have been back then, 20 years ago, give or take, if I had well-developed executive function skills. Education would have been easier. Business would have been easier. Relationships would have been easier, both with myself and other people. Managing a household, just everything would have been easier, which is not to say it would be a walk in the park, like it's all taken care of and nothing's going to happen. We're all human. It's life. Things happen. But the thing that I know that's so wonderful and why I get so excited about these skills and talk about them as I do is because they're life transformational skills. And I don't know any other place where in 7 months you can transform your life, yourself, from the inside out into what you maybe only envisioned, dreamed about, wanted, hoped for, didn't think existed, but wished it did. You can do that for yourself and give yourself that gift in the Adventures in Achievement Foundational Skills program. And I think it's remarkable. And because I spent 5 years being a researcher in 2 international studies, which some of you know that, others don't, I like data. You know, when you're a researcher, data is important to track, to see what changes, what's happening, so that you can know what your results really are. And so the way that I track data with my students is with an executive function assessment, since that's the issue. And every student, when they come into the program, gets an executive function assessment within 24 to 48 hours of enrolling. And from there, they do the 7-month program. I have an ongoing program if people want to continue to develop and want to work on other things like codependency, which so many of us have issues with that, or identity or limiting beliefs, or they want to work more and get more support with their executive function skills and many other things. There's an additional program if someone would want to go on. It's certainly not a requirement at all, but there's where I do the reassessing when people transition there. So I have data when people start, and I know what it looks like. And it's really, really painful to see how it is in the beginning, because I know how to interpret that data and I know what it means when I see the scores on the assessment. And I know how difficult someone's life is, because it isn't hard to imagine based on the skills that I see are so underdeveloped. And then people get a reassessment if they decide to go into the next level program. So now I'm looking at data of people, same people that came in totally underdeveloped. And then 7 months later, I'm looking at data to see how they did. And the data and the results, which if you're on the wait list and receiving the emails that we've written for all of you that are on the wait list, if you are, will show you screenshots and images of what it looks like. And it's real data. It's not been doctored. It's not been anything like I know you can do with data. It's just straight up what it is. It's like going from here meaning really underdeveloped because the scores are way, way too high and close to 100, meaning almost underdeveloped completely. The scores go down to here in the more normative range, Some people end up in the total normative range, some people very close to it, depending on what people did in the 7 months in the program. But here's the thing. If you're like me, you may have come to believe, because life's been so difficult and challenging, that this would be really hard. And this would take a lot of time, effort, and energy. And the truth is, it doesn't. I've had students in the foundation program that had difficulty making the time to sit, let's say, and watch a 90-minute training. They just couldn't find 90 minutes. And so we came to the conclusion, what if they were to do 15 minutes a day, 6 days in a row? That's 90 minutes. Everybody's got 15 minutes. And some of the students, that's how they've gone through the program. 15 minutes a day, 6 days in a row, training is watched, post in the forum so they can get feedback and I can coach them in writing. And then they get on a live call and I coach them there and answer any other questions that they have about the development of that skill throughout the program. It's absolutely amazing what we can truly do in 7 months. If I didn't see the data myself, if I wasn't working for the last 5 years with students all over the world in this program, then I would wonder, how is this possible? How is it possible that people can be in therapy for years or go even work with a coach privately and still not get these kind of results, and then come into this program and 7 months later, they've changed from the inside out and they're living a completely different life? How's that possible? It sounds like magic, except it isn't magic. It's, you could say there's a method to my madness in a sense, if you like that expression, which is this has been put together in such a way that it works. Building one skill on top of the other, very much like happens in childhood and teen years and young adult years. Very methodical, scaffolding approach, all the things that are needed and the kind of support without judgment in a community that doesn't judge, because we're all in the same boat, heading in the same direction, just differently. Because no two students ever do my program the same. And that's great, because they're all getting results. There's no one way to do it. There's no perfect way to do it, because perfect doesn't exist anyway. You're not getting graded. But if you have an interest, if you're in this group and you came to this Facebook group because you wanted to change your life, because you wanted to develop your executive function skills, because you've had enough and you want to put your stake in the ground, so to speak, and say, I'm done. This can't continue. I need to change. If that's you, then I encourage you, if you aren't currently on the wait list, I encourage you to put your name and your information on the wait list. It doesn't obligate you to join the program. That's not what it's for. We put together informational emails for people on the wait list so they could know more about the program. They could know more about the development of executive function skills. And best of all, they could be notified first when the doors open for enrollment in the Adventures in Achievement Foundational Skills program. And that happened 2-3 days ago, earlier this week. We opened the doors. Yes, I know the program officially starts in January. I also realize that a lot of you are struggling now. And so one of the bonuses that I came up with that I think is very important is to offer support in December as people are navigating the holidays. So one of the bonuses is that if you are on the wait list, if you decide that you're going to enroll now and now would be before the 9th, up through the 9th of December, then that entitles you to early enrollment bonuses. And on the 12th of December, which is a Sunday, not during the week, because my days are full during the week. So Sunday I'll be working on the 12th for a morning time at 11:30 a.m. Pacific time and 6 p.m. Pacific time, both on that Sunday the 12th. And I'll be doing a 90-minute coaching call twice that day for the people that are early enrollers. In addition to the fact that early enrollment means you get an executive function assessment. We're going to know what your results show. We're going to know your strengths. We're going to know your weak spots. You're going to do a little writing for me if you can, to give me a little bit of backstory about you, no more than 2 pages typed up. So I get to know everybody who becomes a student. All that's outlined. And, you know, my whole life has been about service. And I realize the holidays are difficult. And I realize that having support in the holidays for some people is a really, really big deal, because they may have had losses, and particularly many people may have had many more losses than typical. And I want to offer support for whatever it is on a coaching call that people need, whatever that might be, that they need some coaching help and support in a non-judgmental space with other people of like concerns, so that you navigate your way as best you can, certainly better than without the support, through the end of December. And come January, we're going to be starting the program. There's going to be things to do. There's resources if you're an early enrollee, things that you get to start to study in advance. And then we'll kick it off with a month of you learning pre-skills that I talked about: decision-making, time management, managing yourself, procrastination stuff. And then the core 13 executive function skills. There's just so much there, but it's not overwhelming. It rolls out in a very comfortable pace so that you can absorb it, learn it, own it, and get the support that you need all in one place. To me, it's heaven on earth, because I feel so blessed to be able to do what I do and help others. Because what is the point in me doing this for me and then going off into the sunset and living my life and not helping other people to have the kind of life I've been able to create for me? You can have this too. And so when I get done with this live and I wrap it up, unless Dawn is still here or someone else that has the link, they can put it in the comments section about where you go if you want to get on the wait list and you want to get the information. Again, no obligation to do anything, nothing to lose, everything to gain, to know what's there, what's in store, and to please understand, at least from my perspective, 7 months is a drop in the bucket. I know a lot of people who have spent years and years in therapy and they still have these problems. And a lot of people that have done a lot of other kinds of work, read a ton of books, attended seminars, attended this, that, and the other, and they still have these problems. I don't want you to suffer with these problems anymore, which is why I do what I do. So as I say in my podcast, if it's of interest to you, either I or someone else will put the link in the comments when I get off the live. At least, thank you so very much. I appreciate that. It's nice that someone can do that for me. That's the link that you want to go to. You just want to put the information that's asked. It's only a couple of things. You'll immediately get an email today And then I think it's tomorrow, the way it's set up, you get the whole lowdown on everything about the program that you need. And then there's a couple more emails that follow after that. That's just giving you the bare bones, the meat of it, as quickly as possible. If it's of interest to you, if it's your time, if you're done suffering, and if you want to take it for a test drive and see what 7 months from now your life is like. Because I have no agenda to tell you this can happen for you if it can't. I've been doing it long enough, and before I've been doing the online stuff, I've been in private practice for over 30 years working with adults like us. So this is a life of service. This is me extending an opportunity to every one of you here in the group, all 2,000 plus of you. If it's your time, then it's time to put your information on that link in the comments. If you aren't getting those emails and information, and then once you get them, take action before or no later than the 9th of this month. If you want the early bird bonuses and all the goodies and the trainings and everything that's there for early enrollment people. And that means I get to see you on the inside. And instead of doing a live like this, where we don't get to interact other than whatever comments you may put there in the chat, in the comments, the thing that's so great in the program is I use Zoom. We're all on a call together. You know, we all can see each other if everybody's on the video screen on their phone or their computer, whatever they're going to use. We are like we're sitting in a room together, and that's what the 12th is going to be like. Excuse me, for those of you who decide that you want to get enrolled early, that's what it's going to be like. A bunch of us sitting around, hanging out, so to speak, seeing each other as if we're in the same room together. And some of you could be in the UK. I have a lot of UK students. Some of you could be in Australia. Some of you could be in Japan. Some of you could be in the States and various parts of the US, Canada. You could be anywhere in the world as long as you have a decent internet connection. That's all it takes, and the desire and the decision to at least put your information on the link that's in the comments here so that you can find out more about what I'm talking about, because I trust that you'll be glad that you do. And if it doesn't interest you and it isn't your time, no worries. You always have this group and what we do here. And if it is, then make sure you get that information on the link so that you can get the rest of the information to make an informed decision to change your life. Thanks for showing up live, those of you who did today. I didn't know, this is pretty spontaneous, didn't know what I was going to specifically talk about other than I wanted to talk about your skills, talk about the development of them, the derailment of them, the opportunity that's available to you. Those were the things that I wanted to share today. And so whether you're watching the replay or you were here live, thank you so much for joining me either way. And I wish you a blessed rest of your day or night, wherever it is that you're watching from and when you do. And I will see you the next time I see you. And hopefully I'll see you on the inside of the program where I can really see you and interact with you and get to know you and help you to create the life you want and deserve. Love you all. Take good care. Bye for now.